Anthony Rose, a seriously accomplished serial entrepreneur. How have you sold the idea of Anthony Rose, the serial entrepreneur, to yourself before selling it to the world?
So I'm going to actually answer it backwards, which is selling yourself to the world and then selling yourself to yourself.
He's known as the man who saved the BBC by creating BBC iPlayer, which, as we know, revolutionized the way we consume media.
It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, I'm God, I can do anything. And then you go and buy Twitter and look what happens.
How could clinicians move away from that perfectionist mindset?
Academics make terrible entrepreneurs unless they do a complete reset of their thinking. But the problem with most pitch decks is
The three most common mistakes and how they can be avoided.
I think one would have to be number two, and then I'd have to say the third one is,
If something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it.
and by the way, I don't think I agree necessarily with that statement.
Okay.
I could say if the odds are stacked against you, you're a bloody idiot and you should find something that you can reliably do.
Welcome to Tomorrow. Today I have the absolute pleasure of hosting someone who's no stranger to the entrepreneurial landscape. He's a true innovator and a seriously accomplished serial entrepreneur. His name is Anthony Rose. Some of you might know Anthony as the co-founder of SeedLegals, a platform that is simplifying the legal and fundraising mazes for startups. Anthony's career is rich in experience and knowledge. He's actually known as the man who saved the BBC by creating and founding BBC iPlayer, which, as we know, revolutionized the way we consume media. He's successfully exited multiple companies as well, ranging in industries from 3D graphics to P2P music to video streaming to social platforms. If anyone understands the art of selling themselves and selling themselves to the world to understand their vision, it's none other than Anthony. In this episode, we delve into Anthony's mind, picking his brain on the art of pitching and selling oneself, which is an area that's often underestimated, especially in the healthcare landscape. He's honestly living proof that the essence of entrepreneurship isn't just about creating a company, but it's about creating value and innovating and relentlessly pursuing your vision, even in the face of adversity when people are telling you otherwise. So I ask one thing of you. As you listen to this episode, I encourage you not just to hear the words that Anthony says, but actually absorb his wisdom. His advice is extremely valuable, and it's the kind of advice you can only gain from a lifetime of navigating the turbulent waves of entrepreneurship and coming out on top. So as always, I hope you guys enjoy this episode. And before we get into it, I want to ask you one thing. So if you enjoy my weekly episodes, then I ask you just to hit that follow button. Whatever podcasting platform you're listening to this episode on, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts, hit that follow button. It's free and it just helps the channel to grow and keeps me motivated. So hit that follow button and give the episode a like rating, share with as many friends as possible. Let's get into this extraordinary episode. Anthony, it's great to have you on the podcast, and I wanted to start off this conversation by quoting Maxwell Maltz. And he is an American cosmetic surgeon, and he's the author of Cybernetics, which effectively is a system of ideas that he claimed could improve oneself, leading to a more successful and fulfilling life. And the quote was, "Your most important sell in life is to sell yourself to yourself." And so I wanted to ask you, how has this concept of selling yourself to yourself first played out in your own journey? How have you sold the idea of Anthony Rose, the serial entrepreneur, to yourself before selling it to the world?
So that's a super interesting and super important one for a startup founder. So I'm going to actually answer it backwards, which is selling yourself to the world and then selling yourself to yourself. So the first thing you learn as a founder is you have to sell yourself to your investors to invest in you. You have to sell to your team to join you on your risky and dangerous mission and leave their well-paid existing jobs for the startup. And you have to sell yourself and your product to your customers when it's super early stage and hardly works and your website isn't there. So everything as a founder is about getting people to believe in you, your team, and your vision and follow you on your journey. And so you are used to, and you have to make forward-looking statements. You have to be larger than life and project, because if you meet with team members or investors and you're saying, well, I'm working on this thing, to change legals, people tell me it won't really work. I'm not sure it's going to work, but, I've got 8 customers, but we're trying. It's like, dude, nobody's going to go and follow you. You have to go. We work on this thing, AI is arriving. It's going to change everything. Lawyers are going to be out of business. The world's going to be different. We are uniquely placed to solve this problem. And so you're learning to sell yourself. But the problem here now, to get to the second part of your question, is at what point do you cross over from projecting this future vision and the path to get there to drinking so much of your own Kool-Aid that you start believing your own BS, and that's the dangerous thing. So as a founder, you need to be completely self-aware that things may not work out. There could be endless number of problems. You could get hacked. Your developers could leave. The customers might bail. A competitor might be arriving. Your servers might crash, whatever it might be. But so you know that, and every day you get out of bed, you're aware of all the things that can go wrong. But nonetheless, you still need to be selling the dream. What I do see is two extremes happening here for founders. Number one, I'm a member of many founder startup groups, and I'm quite surprised how many founders have report imposter syndrome. So they think, well, people think I'm like the mega star, but I'm not really sure. I know nothing about what my area, and people are investing in me, all the success of this business, but I'm deeply worried. The alternative is people who really are so full of themselves that, you get on a call and somebody is so blindly optimistic that what they're going to build is going to be loved by millions, that their revenue plan shows like £100 million of revenue. So how do you navigate the right space in between? And any founder, particularly if you become moderately successful, then it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking, I'm God, I can do anything. And then you go and buy Twitter and look what happens. So you need to stay grounded, but you also need to be selling that dream and that vision in order to get people to journey with you to your hopeful destination.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. And I asked you that question. I know it was a very loaded question to begin with, because I wanted to set the scene for this podcast episode. And I reached out to you initially because I think in specifically the context of the healthcare setting with clinicians, there's a common perception that the focus is solely on academia, clinical medicine, and we get very little exposure to the business world. And along with that comes not understanding the art of selling yourself, personal branding, and all these other related transferable skills. And so that's what the episode's going to be about today. So I think I wanted to start off with that question because I wanted to see your answer, and then we can go from there.
Can I hop in? Because, it's really interesting, sure. Because academics, I think, make terrible entrepreneurs unless they do a complete reset of their thinking. So in academic life, the university gives you grant money in a sense, and your goal is to spend 2 years writing a thesis or white paper or something that will get good marks from somebody. So people give you money, you spend a lot of time aiming for perfection, and someone else marks your work. This is the complete opposite of a startup. A startup is ship something in 2 weeks, get some traction, rinse, repeat. And there's no such thing of good or bad marks. It's persuading people to use your product in its warts and all pre-launch infancy, getting investors to give you money so that you can get more traction and repeat it. And I think often when you see academics, they kind of let out of uni, like prisoners let out of prison, going, we're free. Where's the next meal? What do we do next? Can somebody help? And you go, there is no one to help. You have to make your own way. And on the flip side, your average scrappy UK startup founder, they've developed a world of, there's no one going to give me money. There are no grants or handouts. I have to make my own way. So I'm going to put a bit of money into the business myself. Then I'm going to build a prototype. Then I'm going to reach out to friends and family, and I'm going to do a small bootstrap funding round. We'll use seed fast investments, and I'm going to get some capital. And then I'm going to use that to build more of a product and hire a sales team. And I'm going to have updates every 2 weeks. And sometimes we'll break, and then I'll repeat. So it's a complete inversion from academic life to founder life. And I think that's really what academics need to lead. And you often see that in their pitch decks, where the pitch deck is showing a sort of very complicated solution to an academic problem rather than here's something as a customer I might want and pay £12 for literally tomorrow, and then I'll grow from there. And I think there's definitely some mentoring and rethinking and so on to be had to help academics change their mode to be more scrappy founders.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I've had multiple different conversations with specifically health tech founders, and the consensus is at med school, we're taught to be perfectionists. We just need to get through med school having perfect grades, perfect attendance, overall just be the perfect model medical student, and then we go into being the perfect doctor, right? And so the problem with that is obviously being a perfectionist is probably one of the worst traits you can have, specifically being an early stage entrepreneur, right? Where you just need to get a solution out as quickly as possible and not worry about all the nitty gritty bits. So why do you think that's the case? How can we get clinicians to move away from that perfectionist mindset?
Oh, it's a great question. I would think there are probably two parts to it. One of them is network with founders, because I think one of the interesting things is founders, it's often a solitary thing. You have an idea that, what's clear, I don't invest myself these days, but I see lots of founders, and I'm essentially an erstwhile proxy investor because I see all the pitch decks. And you can see when you meet a founder, if they walk the walk and talk the talk, as in the type of founders that you want to invest in have got a certain way of presenting, a certain confidence. They know the legal terms, they know product development, they've got stage developments. And as soon as an investor, you see somebody who says, okay, well, here's the prototype, I've tested with 100 people, and based on that, I've made a certain set of changes. And actually the product name we changed. And now we've got our domain. And what we're going to do is we're going to hire 2 developers, we're raising 50K. And actually by September, we're going to have our first prototype out for live testing. And then after that, we're going to do larger rounds and we're going to raise this amount because to get it productized and scaled. And we've got our eyes firstly on the UK market, and then it's a global market, whether this is the TAM, the total addressable market. And then we've got our actual addressable market in the UK. And by year 5, we aim to have this revenue. Once you talk like that, then an investor sees that you know what you're about. They know that you've got a mission and a vision, and they can see it, has a good chance of success because you're doing all the things to make it a success, and you'll pivot and so on as needed. So as an academic founder, how can you immerse yourself in that culture so that you see the way others behave? Because there's a certain pattern that is investable. I'm not saying it's right, or I'm not saying it's wrong. That maybe like when you go into the restaurant, if it's got a certain vibe to it and the waiters are dressed in a certain way and the knives and forks, you just know it's going to be a quality meal as opposed to it's a fast food joint or something. So people make value judgments quite quickly. And if you can mimic that and actually act that way, you become more investable. So hanging out with other founders is important. And the other thing I think is just going out and talking to investors. There could be angel investors. It could be friends and family. Don't go to a VC first, but create a pitch deck and try it out on others. And if people go through the pitch deck and go, didn't really know what you're doing, or do I really need to wait 5 years for NHS certification before you can do anything? Isn't there some route to market faster? And so get that feedback. And by getting feedback and acting on it swiftly, you start to change your mental mode from perfection to iteration. And perfection is great in some worlds, but is often the enemy. It sounds like, why wouldn't I want perfection? But one of the things you've realized in your second or third startup is when you think about building for perfection, I see too many founders going, I've made a list of all the product features that we think we want to launch, and now we're going to build them all, and we're not launching until they're built. And then you realize when you've launched that you built twice as much as anyone ever wanted. People aren't using half the features you built. And importantly, half the things people do want, you haven't built. So you'd have been much better off to launch a simpler version with half the features and then quickly see, oh, don't bother building those, but do build those. And that's the better path.
Yeah. Great advice there. Really great answer. And before this podcast episode I recorded with you, I did some brainstorming, and one of the, I guess, drawbacks of being a clinician is obviously this perfectionist mindset. But I think another one is the fact that in general, selling has a negative connotation in healthcare. And so almost selling yourself, you, it is seen as almost a negative, but actually it's not a commercial transaction. It's about conveying your personal brand and reputation. So in your experience, it'd be great for you to break down why you believe those skills are relevant in healthcare and for clinicians particularly.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. And I'm originally from South Africa, then Australia, and now the UK. But I think the English are quite modest. And when you see an American pitch, they're often really impressive, the way that they project themselves and try to have you believe. I mean, at some point it crosses over to, I need a bath bag, this is terrible. But on the flip side, the English are often so modest that it's hard to get excited. And so how can you project outside of yourself? And it is to realize that you are getting people to follow your vision. And to do that, you need to show them that vision. And any astute investor is going to come across lots and lots of founders who want investment. And they have to make decisions in short time frames, because over a few minutes meeting at an event before you get a chance to pitch them, is this somebody who's going to be a successful founder? And rightly or wrongly, they're going to make a bunch of judgments on face value, which is you project, you're confident, you show leadership, you show knowledge of the domain, you show passion and a vision for something. If the vision aligns with something that creates a valuable company, that sounds like a good thing. So yes, the idea is that you're not applying for a grant application. When you apply for a grant application, you do a range of things to make yourself grantable. When you are raising investment or looking to build a team or get customers, you're doing a range of things that align with that. And that's often a learned skill. So if you'll indulge me for a minute, one of the things that you need is to be able to present on stage. And so often that's deeply uncomfortable. So my baptism of fire is like this, which is about 20 years ago. I was CTO at a company doing real-time 3D graphics. And we were finalists on this thing called Web 3D Roundup, sponsored by Intel in Los Angeles, to present our 3D engine, which were the 20 hottest 3D companies in the world. And I insisted in our company that I was going to be the one presenting it, because the engine was flaky as hell and crashed all the time. And I was the only one who was able to run it. So anyway, I insisted on running. The team were in Australia. I was in Los Angeles. In our practice sessions with Intel, our 3D engine had crashed. I was on a call late at night with folks in Sydney. Help, it's crashing. Anyway, it turned out that on the day, you had 3 minutes to present. With 3,000 people in the audience. Holy moly, 3,000. They'd been given drinks beforehand, so they were slightly inebriated. They were armed with ping pong guns. So if you went 1 second over your 3 minutes, they would shoot you with a ping pong gun. And they also had whoopee cushions. So if you were boring or your 3D engine crashed, they would make farting noises. So there I was on stage thinking, I've insisted that I'm the one doing this for our company. Our company really needs a next funding round. So if this crashes, we've got problems as a company. There are 3,000 armed people in the audience, and our 3D engine has crashed most of the time while testing for this. So no pressure. So anyway, it turned out it worked brilliantly. I finished with like 2 seconds to spare. The 3D engine didn't crash. We came second, I think, which was amazing. And there's still a photo of these ping pong balls in this trajectory being shot at everyone on stage. So now every time I get on stage and have to do a presentation, you always have butterflies going. And that's important, because otherwise you're not respecting the audience. That I get on stage, before as I'm going on stage, I'm thinking, are there 3,000 drunk people with ping pong ball guns, and the future of the company depends on this presentation, and it's probably going to crash. And if not, I can chill. So that to me was the getting outside of the comfort zone. So now I can stride confidently on stage, having been through that hell before. And so you might use some similar story on yourself to know I can do it for this presentation.
Yeah, that whole story leads perfectly onto my next question, which is that I listened to the webinar that was posted on SeedLegals, so that will be in the link to the description, and it was with your pitch coach, Claire McMillan, and you discussed a little bit about what investors look for in a great pitch deck, and the emphasis was very much on good storytelling. And throughout that whole story, you had me engaged and had me laughing. So I wanted to ask you, what makes for a good story? and how can you relate that to and just transfer that into a successful pitch?
That is a great question. And the problem with most pitch decks is you sit through the pitch deck, and at the end of which you have no idea what the company does. And the reason is that the company, there are often too many words, and they don't explain why you want it. They explain what they're doing. So to me, a slide deck is not just words, pages and pages of waffle. It's like a Hollywood drama. And your Hollywood drama is in 3 acts. The first part is to explain the problem you're solving. It's like buying into the characters, the character development. So slide 1 is, what's the pain point you're solving? Such and such is insane. We're here to change it. The second part of that is how you do it. So some nice screenshots, some lifestyle images. So you now bought into this is a real problem that actually I, as the viewer, have got, and now I can see beautifully you're solving it. And the next part is the size of the market, the traction, the business plan. And the third part is really the teaser to get you to come back for more, because it's never the case you send someone a slide deck and they go, yes, I'm in. Where do I send the money? The slide deck is the teaser to talk further or get a term sheet or something. So just like the Hollywood drama ends with episode 1 wanting you to watch episode 2, it needs to close with the ask and the traction, so that people go, this is amazing. What do I do next? So it's all about telling the story that hooks the reader or the viewer and wants them coming back for more. And so when I came across Claire, who is an ex-criminal barrister, and she's been saying that in the course of her career, it's all about storytelling. Very few cases are won or lost on the facts. It's usually persuading the judge or the jury of the story. And she's now transferred that art and craft into the art of the pitch deck. And as we went through on the call, a range of pitch decks that people had sent in, it was fantastic to see how really bad they were at telling the story. So you dive in immediately into some blockchain or why this was, you had no idea what it was. So the key thing, I think, is when an investor is looking at your slide deck, although you created the slide deck for the investor, realistically, I think the investor is going to be thinking like a customer. And if they see as a customer, hey, I want one of those things, where do I get it? Then they want to invest in your company. But if you just talk about the technology and the this and the machine learning, they can see there's no consumer who's going to understand it, therefore no one's wanting it, and therefore you're not going to sell any, and therefore you're going to lose money, and therefore I shouldn't invest. So yes, just think of your slide deck as the minimum number of slides needed to tell, one theme per page. Each page is the next chapter in your story, such at the end the person understands and wants into the next episode.
Great advice there. And I guess my follow-up question would be that in a clinical setting where we're used to talking amongst other health professionals in the same jargon, same language, we often forget that when doing a pitch deck or speaking to non-clinicians, that they don't have the same clinical background and the same understanding. And so how do we overcome that barrier as well of getting across our vision in a way that is understood by everyone?
That is a really great question. I think the answer to that is to test your slide deck on people who are not clinicians. And so I'm sometimes on the jury of panels for university spinouts and so on. And I see lots and lots of startup pitch decks, and they're usually happy, bright people. Sometimes it's building a social network or a token wallet or a drone or a new food. It's always happy images. And then you get the university spin-out ones, and there's like picture of an eye with glaucoma or some cancer spot detection. And suddenly you've gone from like happy people with iPhones to this picture of a lesion. And it's like, okay, I've entered a whole new world. And so if you are pitching to investors, when they suddenly see this, oh my God, what am I looking at here? Have I wandered into the A&E or something? And then there's so many buzzwords used that even though, I mean, I'm not from that world, but I've seen quite a few slide decks, and you're looking going, I really don't understand what's going on. So you have to road test and remove every buzzword, acronym, explain things from a user perspective. Explain, for example, if it is glaucoma, you could just your first slide could show a glaucoma picture and going, the examination of most things indicates the current techniques are not sufficient or whatever it is. And there's a new improvement that offers, instead of a 67% now, a 78% recovery thing. It's like, okay, great, not exciting. But imagine that the slide deck showed a crowd walking around Piccadilly, and it says percent of people suffer from glaucoma or will in the next 10 years. That's a 1 trillion market opportunity or something like that. Current solutions are terrible, list of bullet points. Why? We've changed that. And now suddenly you're telling the story, and the reader's probably thinking, oh my God, maybe that's going to be me. I need this solution before I get the next decade goes by. And then you're going to try and show how, with a small amount of investment, you can get your product live sooner than 5-year clinical trial things. Where possible, you want to show a shorter time to market, which means you can validate and test, rather than I need £3 million and 5 years before I'll know whether this is going to work or not. You will find investors that will be patient capital, but you may be kissing a lot of frogs while you go looking for them.
And of all the health tech, or not even just health tech, healthcare related pitch decks that you've seen, what would you highlight as the 3 most common mistakes and how they can be avoided?
I think one would have to be too complicated pitch decks that are not understandable by most. I think number 2 is showing a long path until you've got a saleable product that includes many more trials, many more fundraising, lots of money being spent. That just massively increases the risk. And then I'd have to say the third one is the founding team who feel like they still would like operating as if they're in a university rather than operating as a startup.
Anthony, your journey is inspiring, and you've had so much exposure to different industries, different areas, and success in the world of entrepreneurship. And I saw on Twitter a quote from Elon Musk, but there's no way to verify if he actually said this. But it said something along the lines of, if something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it. And so I wanted to ask you along those lines, can you share some words of encouragement for healthcare professionals looking to venture into entrepreneurship?
By the way, I don't think I agree necessarily with that statement.
Okay.
I could say if the odds are stacked against you, you're a bloody idiot, and you should find something that you can reliably do. No, but I mean, I'm being partially facetious. One of the challenges as a founder is you could pick something that's been done before. The problem is if you start something and it's just a thin skin over something that already exists, then it's hard to get differentiation and it's hard to get investment. On the flip side, if you come up with something that's quite radically different, then you have to persuade people that they want this new thing rather than fulfilling an existing need. And you may be spending years in the wilderness trying to get people to adopt it, persuading people that this is something that is really wanted. So to find the right balance is important. Now, sometimes you just have an idea. There you are, you're out running, and there's something that's been bugging and you really want to do it. So you now need to validate it. But the question is, as you do that, how can you find things? The problem is when you start something, you'll have a bunch of people telling you it can't be done or no one will want it. And the question is, at what point do you believe them and not do anything? Because if you believe everyone who says you can't do it, you'll never do anything. On the flip side, if you go, damn the torpedoes, everyone's telling him it can't be done, I'm going to do it, I think you're super brave or an idiot, because you may be spending years of your life and then it can't be done. You're going to get a lot of, well, I don't know. How do you learn whether that's valid or not? So to go, I'm going to spend 2 years and raise millions and then open the box and see whether anyone wants it or not is an inefficient bet. The question is how you can make a prototype to quickly try to validate it. Now, in some cases, you can't easily prototype it. You need to build the machine or whatever, particularly if it's medical. But in other cases, there might be simpler versions, or maybe you can, as they say, fake it till you make it. What it means is you build the front end experience so people, to them, it looks like the website or the products there, but behind the scenes, you're busy doing it manually. So it might be you offer some method of online diagnosis of something, and your goal is to use AI, but the AI is not there yet. No problem. You just find some trained person to analyze the images, and when that gets too expensive, or you finish the automation of the product, you replace it with that. But your consumer, as long as they're getting a great service, you could have got it out months or years earlier and more reliably by having humans involved in some part of it. And then you would have validated it. And it may turn out that building the AI image recognition for years actually was the worst thing to do, because while you're doing that, someone else has built market share by just getting out an online platform with some people in India looking at the images. And by the time you finish the tech, if it's ever finished, they're already eaten your market. So yes, redefining success is the least amount of work to build something that people can use, and then iterate from there.
That's super valuable advice. And so as we close up the podcast, Anthony, it's been great having you. And I wanted to end with talking a little bit about SeedLegals and the way you're changing how startups navigate legal and funding challenges. So share a bit more about how the platform is empowering the new wave of entrepreneurs.
Yes, and apart from being a business, I'm totally delighted to talk to our customers and see how it is really transforming the way that founders in the UK work and are empowered. So once upon a time, there was no angel investment community, that is people investing personally, £5,000-10,000, and you had to go to a VC. But VCs would only invest when you were earning revenue and your business had been built, and they would invest with deal terms that were very investor friendly. They would have a high level of control in your company, and they would get preference shares. So, they'd get their money back first on a sale, and a range of other things. And then the pendulum swung to crowd investment. But that's a slightly different thing, and probably not useful for most in the medical field. But in between, there's this space called what I call the pro crowd. These are angel investors getting their tax benefits, investing 5, 10, 20, 50,000 pounds each. And you're going to do your first few funding rounds, raising a few £100,000 from these angel investors. And for most founders, I mean, some of them are, super fintech savvy, but most are not. And they would have no idea where to start. And that's the entire place that we have really productized with SeedLegals. So there's a platform and team that you go to, because even though every idea is different, startup fundraising turns out to be remarkably self-similar. So you figure out how much you need to raise, which is often a few £100,000. I mean, if you're building a nuclear power plant or something, it's different. And for some hardware devices, it's different. But for most, it's, you start with a few £100,000, and then you need somebody to help you understand what the valuation might be. And then you want to get your advance assurance for your SEIs to give the investors their tax breaks. And then you want to lead with the term sheet, so you're not waiting for investors to send you the term sheet. And then it may turn out that you can't get enough investors for a funding round, but you have a small amount that people want to invest now. So you might say, I wanted to raise £300,000. But I've got a couple of investors who'd like to invest £20,000, and I could really do that with that money now, because I can hire somebody and get the designs done or whatever. So that is now something called agile fundraising. So instead of doing a big funding round and waiting months to get all the investors to come along and leave on the bus at the same time, you can get individual investors and get their investments ahead of a round using something called a seed fast. So what I love is that on SeedLegals, we automate all of this, but it's the automation which ultimately is almost trivial. The real value is that founders see and understand the set of things to do, from the great pitch deck, the telling the story, the data. Here's the amount of equity that you're going to give away or dilute in a funding round. Here's the number of options to give to advisors. Here's how to raise in a good time or a bad time. And yes, of course, the platform will generate all the documents, but that's almost like boring. The interesting thing is I've realized the important thing on SeedLegals is less the creation of the legals and more actually the empowerment of founders to now see how to go and do each step. And something that, for me, pre-SeedLegals, it took unbelievable amounts of effort. Now it's like in 5 minutes, if I find an investor, I can create a seed fast for them, and it's changed everything.
Fantastic. amazing what you're doing. And as we close up, this is a very open-ended question, and you can answer it however you wish. Would you say there's been a secret to your success over the years?
I'd love to say science, strategy. I think it's actually, I've realized it's more luck and fortune than anything else. And so, your sort of events through life, maybe it's capitalizing, I don't know. But for example, SeedLegals was started because I met my co-founder at a wonderful party in Rome held by the investor in my previous startup. And had I not been there and Laurent not been there, we wouldn't have met and been discussing lawyers and selling and raising investment and the need to change that. And that party was only there because the steps I made in previous things. So I think maybe there's a combination of luck and fortune, and then of course how you seize opportunities from that. For me, it's not by any means the end of the journey. It's still very much the beginning or middle of the journey. The journey will continue. Let's hope that things work going forward, but it's always intriguing. On a daily basis you have to make decisions, and that's one of the other founder attributes. If you're not good at and don't love making decisions, you shouldn't be a founder, because every day you've got lots of decisions to make, from new product developments or new markets, or, do I change the pricing? There are endless number of decisions. So do you make the decisions yourself? Do you empower your team to make decisions? Do you not make decisions? Maybe we'll do another podcast one day on decision making, but we'll keep that as the story hook for the next one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Anthony.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.